Part 29. How cunning and profound this little prince was. Pu Qiutai couldn't sleep. His eyes fell on the wall, where there was a cloud of flowers and branches and shadows. Just like his mood at the moment, the road ahead is boundless. When is this day the end? Shanyan and Mingfang, do you have a chance to go back to the seabirds and enter the forest with Zhu Mingtang? Thinking like this, it was not until after the third watch that he closed his eyes dimly, and when he was about to fall asleep, an exclamation suddenly sounded in his ears. Pu Qiutai sat up with a rub, and at this time Xia Linxuan also woke up, and when he saw his anxious appearance, he said lightly, "I don't know which bastard eunuch had a nightmare. What are you doing so nervous? Waiting for me? It's not a eunuch, it's Shanyan just now." Pu Qiutai didn't care about putting on a piece of clothing. And while explaining to Xia Linxuan, he hurriedly got out of bed, and stumbled out without even asking for instructions. His Majesty Emperor who was left behind was so angry that he couldn't stop grinding his teeth, but in the end, he still stood up, muttering, getting bolder and bolder. And at the same time came outside, heading towards the Song Ying Pavilion. "His Royal Highness Crown Prince? How did you come up here?" As soon as Pu Qiutai entered the Song Ying Pavilion, he saw Zhu Shanyan curled up in the corner of the bed, with no blood on his face at all. The little bully-like child sitting in front of him was not Xia Dongming. Who else would there be? Seeing Pu Qiutai come in, there was not even a little blood on his face. This kid felt a great pleasure of revenge in his heart, shook his legs and glared. What else do I want to ask him? In the middle of the night, he dared to sneak into the bed of the prince. What was his intention? "Well, I didn't. No, Uncle Pu, I didn't have." Zhu Shanyan's tears fell. He was really afraid of killing this child who was 2 years younger than himself. He couldn't imagine how there could be such a vicious child in the world. Punches, kicks, slanders and frame-ups can be displayed anytime and anywhere. Pu Qiutai was also so angry that his body trembled, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Is the prince reversing right and wrong? This is obviously the Song Ying Pavilion, and it is the residence of Shanyan and Mingfang. What are you doing running around without sleeping in the middle of the night?" Unexpectedly, even the wicked sued first. Is it Song Ying Pavilion? How did I not know?" He saw Xia Dongming's face stunned, and then looked around, looked surprised, and said, It's really Song Ying Pavilion. It's so strange. I'll just say I've been walking and walking in my dreams. Could it be that I sleepwalked here?" Pu Qiutai realized once again how cunning and profound this little prince was, and even knew how sleepwalking. He was full of anger but helpless, knowing that as long as Xia Dongming bit to death and sleepwalked, there was nothing he could do. Therefore, he stepped forward and hugged Shanyan in his arms, and said coldly, "In this case, Your Highness, please go back." "Yes, okay." Xia Dongming was also happy, got up and jumped out of bed, but Pu Qiutai found that something was wrong at this time, looked around, suddenly woke up, and hurriedly said, Mingfang, where are you?" "Sister." Zhu Shanyan's face also changed. He just exclaimed loudly, "It is impossible for my sister not to hear it." "How can she not hear it?" At this time, Pu Qiutai had already rushed into Zhu Mingfang's house with him, and at first glance, he almost fainted with anger. Only to see Zhu Mingfang tied to the bed with 5 flowers, with a cloth towel stuffed in her mouth, and she was staring at himself in horror with tears on her face. Jing Lianghou, the personal eunuch beside Pu Qiutai, hurriedly rushed over and untied the rope for Zhu Mingfang. Pu Qiutai was so angry that his chest couldn't help but rise and fall. And he turned around and shouted to Xia Dongming, "How do you explain this? Is this also a good thing done in a dream?" Xia Dongming looked surprised again, and then patted his head. Ah. I remembered, it seemed that someone was in the way just now, so I tied her up, but I didn't expect to tie up this little rabbit cub. That's enough. Just as he was talking proudly, he heard Xia Linxuan's voice behind him. Xia Dongming immediately restrained the smugness on his face, turned around and said in fear, "Father, it's all the child's fault, the child didn't mean it. I really dreamed and somehow got here. All right, you can go back." Xia Linxuan waved his hand irritably. This little devil really refuses to live in peace for a day. Even if you want to make trouble, you can't wait for 2 days? Do you have to be so impatient? Just thinking like this in his heart, he naturally wouldn't fall into the prestige of his son in front of the 2 former dynasty remnants. However, when he raised his eyes, he saw Pu Qiutai standing there with a pale face, although he didn't say anything, but the anger in his heart could be imagined. So, His Majesty Emperor's head immediately began to ache faintly. And he only regretted why he ran over with him. That, since the 2 of them are also in charge of raising Qiutai now, you can't call cubs and cubs in the future, you are the prince. And you should also have some qualities. In the end, Xia Linxuan still couldn't help but appease Pu Qiutai. There is no way, if you want someone to help raise your son, you can't be too protective. Yes, urchin remembered. Xia Dongming glanced up at Zhu Shanyan, thinking that he couldn't call him a cub, so what was it called? Yuner? That's a nice name, isn't it? Is he worthy of it too? Ahem. Qiutai, since the prince sleepwalks so far, forget about it. Xia Linxuan looked at Pu Qiutai, and hoped that his lover could stop in moderation and not make it difficult for himself. Pu Qiutai nodded, which immediately made Xia Linxuan very happy, but saw that he turned his head and looked around. At that time, the eunuch palace maid guarding the Song Ying pavilion and the 2 little eunuchs who followed Xia Dongming were kneeling at the wall, and they didn't dare to take a breath. His Royal Highness Crown Prince has capricious capital, but those of them who are slaves are bound to suffer. That's it this time. Next time, His Royal Highness Crown Prince will sleepwalk again. Pu Qiutai said in a deep voice, and the eunuchs and palace maids immediately became nervous again. And suddenly heard Xia Dongming say proudly, "Mother, I heard that sleepwalkers can't be interrupted, otherwise he will die. Is it possible that the mother concubine will ignore his son's life and death because he disturbed their 2 sisters and brothers today?" Pu Qiutai was so angry that the green tendons in the corners of his forehead were about to burst out. He took a deep breath, and said to the eunuchs and palace maids of Song Ying Pavilion, "That's it. The next time His Royal Highness Crown Prince sleepwalks here, you will report to me. Even if the Emperor stays here, you must report to me in time, understand?" After he finished speaking, he looked at Xia Linxuan and said indifferently, "Your Majesty, you won't object to the minister's treatment like this, right?" Xia Linxuan grinded his teeth a few times. After this Qiutai entered the palace, it was much more majestic than before. And now he has the spirit of the lord of a palace, and he is no longer the desperate Hanlin who only knows how to cry and cry, but his cold and proud temperament is even more charming. Because he was extremely angry and loving in his heart, he could only snort coldly, which could be regarded as acquiescence. The eunuchs and palace maids agreed. Pu Qiutai glanced at Xia Dongming, who showed disdain in his eyes next to him, and said leisurely, "This Yunhai Palace, as long as I am in charge for 1 day, I will not let you lose your lives in vain, so if there is anything, just report it to me, don't worry about someone retaliating. Do you understand?" Xia Dongming was stunned for a moment, looked at Pu Qiutai in amazement, as if he had just known this person, and secretly said to him, "How can he know my thoughts? Blocked my way ahead of schedule? Damn, isn't it?" Is he really that smart? Even this prince can't fight him? In the blink of an eye. Another 10 days passed, and the queen stopped for 749 days, and finally mourned on this day. Pu Qiutai didn't want to go, but as a concubine, he couldn't escape this errand. So, he had to settle Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang early in the morning, dressed in plain white clothes. He went to the palace to Dongxian Pavilion to see the queen on her last journey. The little prince Xia Dongming has been here since last night, and the eunuchs and palace maids refused to leave. His mother, who depended on him, was about to be buried, and from then on, he was really buried in the ground, and he was forever separated from his yin and yang. The little prince, who had always been violent, realized this, and the whole person was like a frosted eggplant. He knew his identity, so he refused to shed tears, but a pair of eyes opened to look at the coffin, only to see that the whole eyeball was covered with bloodshot, and it was red. The second prince came forward to comfort him, but Xia Dongming ignored it, just biting his lip tightly. His eyes looked at the coffin without blinking. His heart was extremely sad and painful, but he didn't know how to express it. As if he could only be relieved by crying, but he couldn't cry out loud, because he was crown prince, the prince who had high hopes from his father and mother, and everyone's eyes were looking at him. This form fell into the eyes of Pu Qiutai, who was standing behind concubine Luo, and he couldn't help but feel a little emotional, although the prince is stubborn and arrogant. The other party's affection for the queen is really heart-wrenching. In fact, where can such a man like himself heal such pain? What the prince needs is another woman as gentle as the queen to raise him, and slowly transfer his attachment and admiration to the queen, which is right. But I don't know why the queen and the emperor insist on going their own way and must hand him over to him. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh again, and suddenly saw Pan Qingyun walking past him with a calm face, and he happened to be fine at this time, so he whispered, "General, the prince is sad in his heart. If he is patient and afraid of getting sick, the general will take him to a no-man's land, let him cry happily." Pan Qingyun stopped, looked at him in some surprise, and then shook his head and said, "How can that be? He is a crown prince, and he is a little man. He must endure this sorrow. Otherwise how can he be a famous son of heaven in the future?" Pu Qiutai was angry, and said in a deep voice, "Whether he has virtue and can become a famous son of heaven in the future is a matter of the future. But now that he is only a 5-year-old child, can the identity of the crown prince change the fact that he is a child? If you don't let him cry, he will be sick in the future. Will he be a virtuous and capable son of heaven in the future? Everyone says that we scholars are pedantic, and the general crisscrosses the field, and the most important thing is to adapt to local conditions. Why are we so pedantic at this time?" Pan Qingyun let him say nothing, scratched his head and said, "No wonder the emperor's brother-in-law said that you are powerful. Sure enough. He is a great talent all over the world. This mouth is really. I can't even argue with that. In this case, then you should go and persuade the prince yourself, now that you are his mother. This errand is just right for you." "You." Pu Qiutai was angry, thinking that I was really kind and was treated as a donkey liver and lungs. "That's it, even if he gets sick. What does it have to do with me?" The general's eyes were red, but he had to endure the pain of losing his sister, and he didn't have to worry about a few words from him. Thinking like this, he turned his head and stood still. However, after Pan Qingyun walked away, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that Pu Qiutai's words made sense. My father and mother cried bitterly every day, but they could barely eat some gruel. And he endured his grief and refused to cry in front of others, lest he fall into the majesty of the general. Now I feel more and more upset and irritable. I can't even eat anything, and my chest is like a big stone, hard and painful. He is still an adult man, and he is still tortured like this. Ming'er is just a child. If he is like himself, how can he carry it? In this way, Master Pu is really good for him. As soon as he thought of this, Pan Qingyun entered Dongxian Pavilion, carried Xia Dongming to a place where there was no one in the back hall, and said solemnly, "His Royal Highness Crown Prince, if you want to cry, cry. In fact, I want to cry too. We can't bear it." Before the words were finished, the tears flowed out. When Xia Dongming saw that this majestic god of war uncle was cried, so he couldn't hold back his grief anymore, and threw himself into Pan Qingyun's arms and cried loudly. Pan Qingyun accompanied him and shed a few tears. After all, he couldn't be as wanton as Xia Dongming, because he just hugged the little guy, gently stroked his back, and silently shed tears, and suddenly heard Xia Linxuan's voice outside the door. "I heard the sadness of crying here from afar. What's wrong?" Xia Dongming immediately stopped crying, got off Pan Qingyun, and drove with him. Xia Linxuan stepped forward to pick up his son, wiped his tears for him, and listened to Pan Qingyun repeat Pu Qiutai's words, and he suddenly said, "That's right. Qiutai is careful. So many people in the palace didn't expect this layer to go up." After speaking, he looked at Xia Dongming, touched his little face and said softly, "It's still your mother who loves you, and before she died, she arranged a good path for you. Qiutai is a benevolent and kind person, although you offended him because you were ignorant, but at such a critical time, he still couldn't help but care about you. In this way, I can rest assured." Xia Dongming still had tears on his little face, and when he heard this, he immediately turned his head and said angrily, "What do he care? Besides those two remnants of the previous dynasty, who else would he care about? It's just a cat crying mouse. Fake mercy. Phew. I'm not unusual. How do you speak? That's your future mother concubine. How dare you say anything about a cat crying mouse, so old and ignorant?" Without waiting for Xia Linxuan to speak, Pan Qingyun taught a lesson on the side. "But I heard His Majesty Emperor say, it's okay, one day he will understand what kind of character Qiutai is. Okay, it's time to get up. Let's go out and send your sister on the last journey." The queen was finally buried in the imperial mausoleum, and the palace was busy for several days before finally returning to calm. A month later, the mourning clothes were removed. Qingbi and other palace maids also entered the Yunhai Palace. They read the queen's old love, and Pu Qiutai also sympathized with them, so they let them serve Xia Dongming carefully. So, the palace returned to its former life. In the singing and dancing, it was a murderous secret. These days, Xia Dongming didn't go to Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang for trouble. Pu Qiutai very much hoped that he was finally tired of this childish game. But he also knew very well that this was just self-deception. And the reason why he no longer came to trouble the sisters and brothers was probably because the little prince was still immersed in grief, and once this extreme grief passed, he was afraid that the arrogant little guy would be even more irritable. Pu Qiutai has a headache, but he is helpless, and now he can only cover the water with soldiers. Because this morning, watching Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang finish their homework, he heard Luliu come over to report that His Royal Highness Crown Prince had punched twice in the courtyard. But he had been looking this way, so he knew, I always have to come. Let's go, I'll take you around today. I still remember that Shan Yun and Ming Fang still lived here before they were 5-year-old. Right? There should be an impression of many places, right? Closing the book, Pu Qiutai said to Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang, and immediately made the two children happy. In the end, they are still children. How can there be a reason not to go shopping and play? It just so happened that His Royal Highness Crown Prince didn't know what was going on, so he called Xia Dongming out. Pu Qiutai took a look. This is a good opportunity. Can't I hide if I can't provoke you? For the sake of the fact that the pain of losing your queen mother has not completely passed, I will not worry about you these days. So, he took this sister and brother out of the Yunhai Palace, and he went to the Imperial Garden. Before he could reach the gate of the Imperial Garden, he saw a team of honor guards coming. Pu Qiutai didn't want to meet with the concubines, so he pulled the two children and the Yulan and Honglian to the side, but saw a eunuch in front of him and said loudly, "Is it concubine Wen?" "Concubine Yan is invited." Pu Qiutai sighed. "This is the harem. The tree wants to be quiet, and the wind does not stop. You don't want to mess with others, and others may think the same as you. When I came to Li Qingyu, I saw her sitting on the phoenix seat, and when she saw Pu Qiutai coming, she didn't get off the phoenix seat, but just smiled and said, 'Concubine Wen has been in the palace for a while now, right? How is it? Are you still used to this harem life?' Pu Qiutai said lightly, 'It's okay. My mother called me over.' 'But you have something to say?' 'Because concubine Yan and concubine Luo are slightly higher than him in position, it is not wrong for him to say so. Aren't these women just to show their superiority in front of him and make him interesting? Okay, then he will do what they want. I hope that from now on they can work as the emperor. And it is best not to let him come to the Yunhai Palace at every turn.' But when I heard concubine Yan smile again, she said, 'Where do I dare to tell you? It's just that I heard that on the first night of the little prince's visit to the Yunhai Palace, there were some stories, so I had such doubts.' 'Is this the beginning of the stirring?' Pu Qiutai sighed in his heart, and he didn't want to talk to concubine Yan, so he said lightly, 'Mother is afraid that you have heard false rumors. Although the little prince is more lively, he is fine in Yunhai Palace, and we get along well. There are many people in the palace. What words do not change once they are spoken? Mother is the assistant to the sixth house. But it is better to be cautious, lest one be careless. When will the rumors be blinded?' Li Qingyu was suffocated. The smile on her face slowly disappeared. Her eyes looked Pu Qiutai up and down, only to see that the other party was neither humble nor arrogant, standing there like a pine tree. Where could he still see the cowardly and ignorant look made when he was bent on death in the Qingliang Palace? So, she smiled slightly and said lightly, 'Oh, I want to thank you for reminding me. This harem is indeed very complicated, and concubine Wen is new here, so he should be careful everywhere. If you have any troubles, just come to me.' 'Then thank you, mother.' After Pu Qiutai finished speaking, he stepped aside. Li Qingyu glanced over here again, and with an order, the guard of honor went forward. It's amazing. He used to look like he was bent on death, but now he dares to hide his edge when he speaks." After speaking for a while, Li Qingyu sneered, and Huang Li, the confidant palace maid beside her, hurriedly stepped forward and said with a smile, "Mother doesn't have to care. Call the slave maid to come and see. It's just the emperor's favor, and now the prince is fostered under his name. So he doesn't know the height of the sky. When he lives in this palace for a while, he will know the difficulties here. And he is afraid that he will not cry out when the time comes. Don't underestimate him too much." Li Qingyu snorted coldly. "Since it is famous all over the world, it will not be a stupid pig. Fortunately, let's not rush now, and let the prince play with him." When she said this, she couldn't help but laugh, slowly changed her position in the chair, and chuckled. "This harem is getting more and more lively. Well, there's nothing bad about it, isn't it? It is precisely in this excitement that it is easy to harvest. Mother doesn't have to be so good-tempered in the future. In terms of position, although you are lower than concubine Yan Luo, it is only a level. How can she not be so big? She actually sat on the phoenix and talked to you. Let the emperor know." She will be reprimanded. Pu Qiutai didn't take these things seriously, but Honglian was already angry and upset for him. But seeing the master, he smiled faintly and said, "What's there? She likes to talk like that, and she says it like that. Do you want to sue for this kind of thing? You used to serve by the emperor's side. But you couldn't hold your breath like this?" One sentence made Honglian speechless, and suddenly heard Zhu Shanyan smile and said, "Sister Honglian, you don't know. Uncle Pu is called pampering and humiliation, and he is the highest state of a gentleman." When the words fell, he only laughed at the Honglian, and the Liulu shook his head and said, "It turns out that this is a pampering and humiliation, but we have become a calculus." After speaking, he saw Pu Qiutai and smiled. "Don't be shocked and don't dare to be pampered. But it's true that you don't have to be angry and troubled by this kind of thing. It's really a mediocre person. Yes, the mother is a gentleman and is not shocked, the slave is a palace maid. And the one who serves is naturally mediocre." After Honglian finished speaking with a smile, she suddenly heard Zhu Mingfang beside her say, "Huh, is there Yonhe Palace? I don't know who lives in it now." Yonhe Palace? Was this the place where you two used to live? Pu Qiutai looked down at the sisters and brothers, but saw Zhu Mingfang shaking her head and said with a smile, "Yonhe Palace used to be uninhabited, but the flowers bloomed there in all seasons, and my mother once took us to see it." "Really? In that case, let's go over and have a look. At this time, I'm afraid that there are no other flowers, and if it's good, maybe there are a few autumn chrysanthemums left," Pu Qiutai said. So he changed the direction, not to the Imperial Garden, but led Zhu Mingfang and Zhu Shanyan to Yonhe Palace.